just great to see you all, and thank you very much for being here. So, without any further ado, my lecture is called Lessons from the Past, Learning for the Future, and as I'm a teacher, it's got 3 parts to it. I'm going to obviously focus on education. You'd expect that because I'm the Vice Dean for Education, but I do particularly want to talk about and to celebrate teachers, because I think teachers are a really important and special breed of people. Those who know me know that I like history and I like films. And one of my very favourite films is a film called A Man for All Seasons. It's the Fred Zimmerman film of the Robert Bolt play about the life of St. Thomas More. And he's also my favourite saint. He's had quite a bad press recently, but he's still my favourite. And there's a fantastic scene in that film where the young Richard Rich asks Thomas More for advice, for career advice. Rich is incredibly ambitious, but Thomas More says to him, "Be a teacher." And Rich says, "Well, why would I be a teacher? I mean, who would know it?" And Thomas More says, "Well, you will know it, and your pupils will know it, and God will know it. It's not a bad public, that." And then he says, and the quiet life. So for those teacher colleagues here at King's, I say we can offer you the first 3, but not the quiet life. Sorry about that. And we can't offer you that for a very, very good reason. And that's because as teachers of healthcare professionals, we have a really special and incredibly demanding task. I don't need to tell you. We educate people for situations which we ourselves have never encountered. Our students face things and manage them and deal with them, those situations we have never seen. And that's our mission, that's our task. And I think this was brought home to many of us, certainly to me, in the recent COVID pandemic, where we know that students went into situations we simply had never faced. Perhaps until about March 2020, many of us old-timers thought we had actually seen it all, and if we hadn't, we pretty much had been near as enough to know what school was. But when COVID struck, we knew we hadn't. And I'm sure that many, like me, asked ourselves, have we given enough to our students to prepare them for what they now face? It was chilling. And I'd just like to say how very grateful I am to have had 2 fantastic colleagues with me at Oxford Brookes, Julia Winter and Sarah Neal, who are here today, because we together did the best we could for those students. And I think we did okay. But I want to say a massive thank you, because it was a terrifying time. But that's the task of the teacher. So, my talk is divided into 3 parts. All 3 are aimed at answering that question. What do we know about how to prepare? What can we draw on to prepare the next generation for those situations which they will experience, which we haven't? I want to say a little bit about community. Today we would probably call this environment, but I use the term community because that's the term that I grew up with and that I used in my research. I want to talk about new technologies because they are both a great source of excitement and in some ways probably something that we're a bit wary of. They're certainly things that will make a big difference to healthcare and to education. And then I want to end with some lessons from the COVID nurse study. That's under the title Hope, because I think you'll be pleased to hear that actually when we look at what we were doing before COVID and we analyse what nurses said during COVID, yes, there was lots of things we could improve, but there was also lots that we were doing right, and we should continue and build on those things. So I'd like to start with community, and this is a slide which shows you the London boroughs as they were before 1972. And I say that because I want to talk with you about a piece of work, about some work that I did in the 1990s, which looked back to the experiences of individuals living in the boroughs of Kensington and Paddington and later in Brent. Before I do that, I want to say why I came to do this piece of work. So I came to King's in 1998 to teach health promotion, and I was at the same time doing a master's degree in health promotion, not here, but at Brunel University. And I asked my then mentor, Professor Alison Weil, who's in the audience, what should I do for my thesis? We did a research project. And Alison said, I think you really should do something about something you know something about. You seem to know about Irish people. Why don't you do something about Irish people? So Alison was quite right, actually. I didn't realise what I knew, but I did know quite a lot about Irish people. And I developed a project which looked at the health experience of two generations of Irish people. One, a group of elderly Irish people living in Paddington and Kensington, and then leading on from that, another piece of work looking at their children, really, looking at a second generation of Irish people living slightly further afield. And this produced two papers. But before we look at the papers, I'd like you to meet some of the people and see some of the places. Now, before I show you these slides, I don't want you to be distracted by hair colour. Now, Tommy's already alluded to hair colour, and I just want to say that you will notice that my hair is dark. I've been 3 times at King's, and you might notice as we go through the slides that each time my hair's got lighter. I don't claim causation, but there must be an association. But let's meet some of the people who were in our community. So first of all, you can see, the first person I'd like to point out is my sister. My sister is the small child with the doll, who's pointing at us quite directly in the picture, and that's my mum sitting next, and I'm the little child to the right of my mum. And we're sitting in our backyard. Now, this was taken in the 60s, so you can see that actually the swinging 60s hadn't really hit West Kilburn. But nevertheless, there we were. And to your left, that's our dad. So Bill Malone, and he was a builder's labourer. And you can see that Dad is pictured in front of those big tenement buildings, which were absolutely, completely across West London and Ladbroke Grove, and they were clearing out buildings, and that's the job he did all his life. Educated only until 16, but nevertheless really valued education. And I say that with conviction because they saved all our school photos, that's me on the far side, and when I looked at the papers I also saw that they had saved the letter that showed that I'd been accepted to go to my secondary school, which was the Convent of Jesus and Mary, and there you see a group of friends and colleagues in about the 3rd or 4th year. So education was really important, really, really important, but they themselves, I think although they had been intensely educated, they had beautiful handwriting, but they hadn't been educated for very long. And so what did the community look like? What did this place that we were in look like? Well, at the top you can see the school that we went to, St Mary's East Row. East Row is in the Goulburn ward of Kensington and Chelsea borough, and it's one of the poorest wards in the country. Kensington and Chelsea is a very rich borough, but even to this day, Goulburn is a poor borough, and we went to St Mary's School, and we also went to Bosworth Road Church, and there are 3 other people in the audience who also went to Bosworth Road Church and St Mary's School. And to get there, we had to, if we lived in West Kilburn, we had to cross the middle place, which was the Halfpenny Steps. And if we lived in Kensal Rise, which, where's Anne? Anne, we used to come down from Kensal Rise. We came down these little steps from Harrow Road down onto East Row. We went past Octavia stores, got some sweets if we could, and carried on to the school. And this is what London was like. It wasn't bright, it wasn't glitzy. It was really not a very easy place to live in many ways. But we were truly, I think, protected from it. So what then did I learn when I went back 20 years later to talk to those who had been through this London living experience? You probably know that the health of Irish immigrants in England has been described as really quite poor for both first generation and for second generation immigrants. Demographically, there's a lot of ill health, mostly related to lifestyle issues, alcohol use and poor diet. But when I spoke to this generation of first generation Irish people who had been through difficult situations, often quite considerable periods of itineracy, I was saying to Josephine that I saw our father's travel card, the card that he used to travel between England and Ireland in the 40s and 50s. And it gave all the places he had lived, and often they were hostels and they were digs. So there was lots of movement between very, I suppose, fragile accommodation. And it is quite harrowing, perhaps, to see the language of migrancy, the restrictions on movement, the restrictions on work that can be done, applied to your own family, and they were. So it wasn't such an easy place. And yet, in the 90s, when I spoke to people in Kensal Rise and Queen's Park, they described a rather positive health experience. They described surviving these situations by developing helping networks that they had formed in order to develop their houses, to build their homes. Yes, they had moved around, but they were different to others. They'd managed to put down roots. Most importantly, they had a sense of belonging. They had a sense that what they did mattered, and the work that they had done, although simple, was dignified. They had a shared emotional connection. They were integrated within society, but they were not subsumed by it. They valued work, the family, the church, and the school. They had the characteristics of what Tonys would call sociologically a Gemeinschaft, a community saved. They knew who they were. They were bounded by geography, but not completely. They had their own environment, which they created and sustained, and which they saw as health promoting. So this was important because although a lot was written about the ill health of the Irish, this was about their health. And by this time, I was thoroughly inspired by Professor Sarah Cowley and her work on what creates health, salutogenesis. So it was great to see this described in this way. It's also striking for me, as a teacher, someone who's interested in education, that they created for their children the environment in which they could succeed. If you talk to my second generation friends who are here today, and I thoroughly suggest that you do, you will hear that they have succeeded in education, in health, in commerce, and in the arts. But their biggest success is not in what they've done, but in who they are and how they have maintained those connections which their parents engendered in them. The great thing about being part of a really strong community is it allows you to leave it and to find other communities. And of course I did, and the community I found was King's. Now many of you have heard this, but I will just say it. So when I travelled on the number 6 bus from Kensal Rise to the Strand, I can honestly say, to start my history degree, it was like crossing the Rubicon. It was so completely different. It was such a different world. People graded your essays with letters from the Greek alphabet. You only had to have one lesson a week, and you had to be with one other person at that lesson, and that was basically it. It was quite hard, but not in a way I'd ever experienced it before. People called you Miss during lectures, and certainly in supervisions, you were referred to as Miss Malone. It was a world of gobbets and history and the Dreyfus Affair and the Zinoviev letter, and it was thoroughly different to anything I had encountered before. The people were different. Luckily, as always, I found a good friend to help me navigate that different and sometimes quite difficult terrain, and that's Angela. Angela Warren, who's here with her sister Margaret in these pictures, and her mum and dad. And there we are graduating from King's in 1983. The great thing about being at King's was it truly, honestly gave us a liberal education. It taught us how to think, and I will always be incredibly grateful for that. After 3 years of what I think was a very, very privileged experience, I decided that I should ignore the careers advice given by the brilliant teacher, Dr. David McLean. He was a brilliant teacher of modern European history, but I don't think he would have been a very good careers teacher because he advised me to become a merchant banker. He said that was really the only job that was, suitable for a young woman like me. I thought perhaps that wouldn't work. So I thought it was really time to give something back to society, and I think that's the right impulse to come to nursing with. However, I have to say I actually did not think they would ever take me to nursing, but guys did, and here I am. And I must also say that that was hard. It was hard in a very different way to being at school and to being at university. But here at Guy's, and you can see, here we are on the Guy's campus, I'm very, very lucky to say I met Judy Hayden, who is here today, and also Helen. But the only pictures I have of Helen are us partying. So I couldn't put those up, Helen. But Judy was a fantastic support, and we, I think, got through things together. If history teaches you about thought, then nursing teaches you about the fragility and the dignity of human life, and how difficult it is to be with people who are in pain. And Tommy, you've just given us such a fantastic rendition of that. But also what a privilege it is to be able to offer something, even if that something is just your human company. After nursing, I stoically continued and did midwifery. I absolutely loved midwifery. It was so exciting. I have a record of all my deliveries, Sam, which I'm very happy to share with you. But as you can see, I'm making a bit of a drama here about weighing this baby, although I do have to say I did deliver it, so I felt very proud, at home in Lewisham. Midwifery was fantastically exciting. If I'm honest, I think it was too exciting for me. And deep down, I knew I probably was better at teaching than actually doing. And so I thought, well, what's mostly a teaching job? Oh, it's health visiting. How wrong I was. I thought, that's it. I'll go out and teach people how to give immunisations and vaccinations, how to monitor their child's development, how to weigh their babies. I was quite into weighing babies by this stage. Until I went to Kidbrooke Clinic for my first health visiting placement. And there I met a really amazing group of people who were health visitors, Yasmin, me and Sharif, and Rosie Coyne, who was also my landlady for a while. And from those people, I learnt that how to work in what was openly recognised as a sink estate. I mean, Kidbrooke Clinic, you might know, it's a very elegant area now, but at the time it was a housing estate that had been built by a really major architect, but it was isolated from just about everywhere else. There were very few facilities, and the families who were moved to live there were troubled. They had difficulties in other situations. And 2 years before I went there, they'd had a very sad and difficult child death. So it was incredibly fragmented community, massive lack of confidence. And Yasmin and Rosie worked to develop those connections, that sense of importance, that ability to relate to each other that I had so luckily and so effortlessly experienced in my own early life. They worked to develop that here because they knew what I learned in due course, that people can only hear the messages we give them when they feel able to hear, to do something about it, to do what they can do for the best interests of themselves and for their families. And I learnt that message there. At the same time, I met an incredible group of young women, many of whom are here today, who were health visitors, interested, yes, in immunisation and vaccination, but also in community, in social justice, in trying to support families so that they could achieve what they wanted to for their children, and all of them wanted the best. They just often didn't know how to get it committed to equality, committed to equity, and committed to going that extra mile so that people could get what they need. It was at the end of my experience at Kidbrooke Clinic as a student midwife, as a student health visitor, that I wrote a paper called Hello, I've Come to Be Weighed, which was about a women's health group on the clinic. It wasn't actually about people being weighed at all. They didn't want to be weighed. They just wanted to come and to talk. And I was invited to present that paper at a conference, which was organised by Jenny Wilson-Barnett. And it was at that conference that the chair of my session was now Professor, then Dr. Sarah Cowley. And I said to Sarah, I'm really worried because actually the lady who's on first, she's got loads of numbers, she's got loads of statistics. I've just got what people have said. And Sarah said, well, you know, words can be every bit as important as numbers. And how right she was. And once I'd met Sarah, I knew I had to follow her back to King's, which in fact I did. Eventually I got back here, they let me back in, and I came into the Department of then Primary Care, led by Alison. And Alison was my mentor. And I have to say, Alison, all credit to you. You really, well, I'll tell you what the things that Alison got us up to, I should say. So this is called technology, new technology, old wisdom. So under Alison's good guidance, a number of us, but most importantly, Ruth Harris, who is here, and myself, and a group from primary care, offered ourselves up to one of the smaller research networks in London. It was called WellRep, the West London Research Network. And Alison said, get in there and get some money. And we did, actually, because that's what we should do. So we got in there and we started to look at the impact of this new thing, the internet, on primary care. So the first paper that we produced was about how doctors received information from the internet when it was presented in consultations. The first thing was it wasn't very often presented, so people probably used it but didn't say that they were. But in a survey of 272 health professionals, they were mostly GPs, we found that there were very clear categorisations being used of patients by doctors and use of internet information. We found first that some doctors felt that some patients had a legitimate reason to use the internet. The sort of reason that could be legitimate would be if it was a matter of controversy. So, for example, if you came with information on the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine. However, there were also non-legitimate reasons. This could be about cosmetic interventions or insubstantial health concerns. People who came with this source of information were called the worried well and were seen as being demanding. The worst group of all, and there was a worst group, were those who came with a self-diagnosis that they had made on the internet, and this was very unfavourably viewed. We, in our wisdom, diagnosed that this was indeed professional insecurity and disempowerment in the face of the new patient specialist. And you might ask, how much has the world moved on? But we were very vocal, very strong-minded, and we had a lovely publication in Family Practice and got to go to New Orleans with a poster, which Ruth still has a picture of, which carried an image of our project, which was called Nettie, the Internet. So that set the tone, and that project formed the foundation for my doctoral thesis, which was about health information seeking and use of the internet by families living in sure-start areas, again in the centre of London, and coming from that, perhaps one of the most seminal papers was on health information seeking and its effect on the doctor-patient digital divide. This paper was presented at the Royal Society of Medicine as a keynote talk. I've forgotten which year, but it was a keynote talk, and here you can see the paper cited. It was by myself, Lucia Mathers, John Dooley, my husband, and Alison. It looked at the different patterns of health information seeking against these districts, across these districts. We surveyed 224 individual users of services in inner London, And using a variety of statistical methods, descriptive and multivariate, we described different geographical districts with different patterns of health information seeking, which were linked to internet use. There was very clearly a difference in the way people were using the internet. One geographical area was defined largely by those who sought information online, but also who sought information everywhere. They were information hungry, and the internet was used as well as everything else, including the health visitor and books. Those who had got more and wanted more. In contrast to this, there were other geographical areas, sometimes within wards, but not all, but sometimes including a number of wards, which internet use was much less noticeable, and information seeking generally was much more passive. We describe this as being information sought through assimilation. These people were likely to get ignored. They were likely to be left behind. Our conclusion was that the advent of the internet reinforced patterns of health information seeking, rather than, as everybody thought, creating new ones. It increased the possibility of a digital divide, in which those who already had got more information, and it created an atmosphere which could be information rich but wisdom poor, as people didn't know how to translate the information they were receiving or to accredit it with the weight and importance it should have or shouldn't have. As a result of those studies, my own conclusion, and the conclusion from the study, was that the internet alone wasn't good enough. It needed skilled individuals who could actually help people find what they need, understand what it meant, and could do that in an equitable way across different populations. The first paper here on the left describes some more of the digital divide. The second is the front of my thesis. And the third is, I suppose, the remedy for that lack of equity, which was about a health visiting service. This is the Why Health Visiting study, a true magnum opus led by Sarah and a large team at which we investigated the evidence which suggested that health visitors were in the best place to do this work, promoting social justice and equity, and also to do other work which related to it, but not directly: immunisations, vaccinations, safeguarding of children, a true holistic promotion of child and family health. So having looked at communities and having looked at the internet and its advent, and I think just to say about the internet, it's worth reflecting messages from those early days into how we now think about artificial intelligence and its scope and its usefulness. It strikes me that the issues are not so different, and perhaps we need a judicious look at our approach to that, especially in education and in health. So I wanted to end on a positive note and to say that there is definitely hope, because as many of you know, when I did go to the dark side and go to Oxford Brookes, it actually, I have to say, created a number of fantastic opportunities for me. And in those very dark days of COVID, when asking that question, is anything that we've done going to help our students, that led to a project, the COVID Nurse Project, which is here, which was a multi-centre project across 6 universities right across the UK, at which we did a pre-survey of students before they went into placement. They did diary recordings while they were in placement. We had 272 students, and they had a post-placement interview with one of our researchers who was also a nurse teacher. And we asked them what it was like and what they'd used and what had worked and what didn't. Now, they were critical, of course. I mean, they had been through an amazing experience. They talked about simple things that could be made much better. I hesitate to say it, and Mary is directly in my line of fire, placements, and not just placements, but the timing and how, all those things that we already know about. But the really heartening thing that I'd like to end with is that although they were often critical of the university and sometimes felt the university was to blame or was responsible that the university couldn't possibly have been responsible for. There was some misattribution, and they did have difficulties in being part of teams and in communicating and getting their needs met. We found several instances when, although students said, I didn't learn anything in the university, it was just all theory really, I only learnt on the ward, when push really came to shove and they had to make really difficult decisions in highly charged situations of intense acuity, and when protocols on hospital wards were so tight and adhered to with such rigour, these nurses often took recourse to evidence rather than protocol. And Helen Aviard is here, and that work that they had done about knowing why you're doing something rather than just accepting what a protocol says you should do came through really, really strongly. So, although there's much that we should change, there's also much that we should hold on to and think about how to do it better and more effectively. They did talk about clinical academics. And certainly a clinical academic who's there with you, who's teaching next to you and is armed with the evidence base, would have been for these nurses the very epitome of what nurse education should look like. And we've got some way to go. I just wanted to say thank you very much. I chose this picture. It's quite an old picture, but I just thought I looked quite good in it, so I thought I'd put it in the middle. So there we are, that's the trainer. So I just wanted to draw it all together and say, then what have we learned about transgenerational education when we know how important it is? Well, first of all, we need to look at communities, need to look at the environment and pay attention to them, because those communities, that environment, those connections, those bonds, those trusting relationships, they make a big difference. And they make a big difference to those who teach, and they make a big difference to those who learn. And in many ways, as a manager, I'm in a very privileged position, because with Irene and with the team, we have a chance to try to do that, and we are. So that's the lesson for us. And technology, we talk a lot about technology. We certainly should embrace it, but we should know the importance of people. We should know the importance of people who help its judicious use, who help equity in its use, and help to make sure that whole groups aren't disadvantaged by new technologies which they're not in a place to use. And then finally, we should take confidence as nurse midwifery and educators for health professionals, because there are some things that we are doing well, and we've done them well when we didn't know we needed to do them well, and the evidence shows that. And we should have the confidence to look at those things we're not doing so well and try to build on those good things to make it better. So that's all I wanted to say, and I just want to say a very big thank you for listening, and thank you very much for coming here this afternoon, and I'll hand you back to Adam. Thank you.